I met Leon through mutual friends when I was 24, and he was 26. He worked in IT for some boring company, quiet and steady in that way that seemed really appealing after dating a string of guys who couldn't hold down jobs or remembered a call when they said they would. Leon was different. He showed up when he said he would. He listened when I talked, and he didn't try to change me or make demands. When I told him early on that I didn't want kids, ever, he just nodded and said that was fine with him. Most guys would have argued or tried to convince me I'd changed my mind, but Leon just accepted it. That's when I knew he was marriage material. We got married after dating for about a year, and everything felt like it was falling into place perfectly. We bought this cute little house in a good neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Leon handled all the paperwork and mortgage stuff because honestly, that kind of thing makes my brain shut off. And he seemed to actually enjoy dealing with all those details. I focused on making the house feel like a home, decorating and organizing and hosting dinner parties for our friends. For the first few years, things were really good. Leon worked his steady job. I bounced around between a few different marketing positions trying to find the right fit. And we had our routines down. But somewhere around the 5-year mark, things started to feel different. Leon became even more withdrawn than usual, spending longer hours at work and then coming home to disappear into his computer for the rest of the night. I tried to talk to him about my day, about things that were bothering me or exciting me, and he'd give me these distracted little responses while staring at his screen. It was like living with a roommate who barely tolerated my presence. I started feeling invisible in my own marriage. That's when I got the job at the tech firm doing marketing for their software products. It was a big step up from my previous positions. Better pay and way more interesting work. The whole team was younger and more energetic than anywhere I'd worked before. And for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. There was this group of us who'd go out for drinks after work sometimes. Actually talk about real things instead of just sitting in silence. Brittany from sales became one of my closest friends pretty quickly. She got what it was like to feel stuck with someone who didn't appreciate what they had. Ian worked in the same department as me, handling the technical side while I dealt with campaigns and messaging. He was funny and smart, and actually paid attention when I was talking. When I'd tell him about a presentation I was nervous about, he'd check in later to see how it went. When I wore something new, he'd notice and say something nice. It sounds stupid, but after years of Leon barely looking up from his computer when I walked in the room, having someone actually see me felt incredible. At first it was just friendly. Office banter, group hangouts, nothing that crossed any lines. But Ian started staying late when I had to work late, bringing me coffee in the mornings, sending funny messages during boring meetings. I found myself looking forward to seeing him every day in a way I hadn't looked forward to seeing Leon in years. When Ian would smile at me or laugh at something I said, I felt alive in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. Leon didn't notice any of this. Of course, he'd ask how work was going, and I'd tell him about the projects I was excited about, the friends I was making, and he'd nod along like I was reading him the weather report. He never asked to meet any of my new friends or wanted to hear details about what I was actually doing all day. It was like he was perfectly content to have me be this separate part of his life that he didn't need to engage with as long as I was home to split the mortgage and make dinner sometimes. The thing with Ian evolved slowly. Longer conversations, inside jokes, him finding excuses to work closely with me on projects. When he started texting me outside of work, just funny things or asking my opinion about random stuff, it felt natural. He was interested in what I thought about things. He wanted to know about my weekend plans and would remember things I'd mentioned wanting to try, or places I'd said I wanted to go. Leon couldn't even remember that I'd switched to oat milk in my coffee. I know how this probably sounds, but it wasn't like I was looking for something to happen. I was just enjoying having a friend who actually cared about me as a person. When Ian started flirting more obviously, complimenting me in ways that were definitely not just friendly, I didn't shut it down because it felt so good to be wanted. To have someone think I was attractive and interesting and worth pursuing, Leon hadn't made me feel desirable in years. The first time Ian kissed me, we were working late on a campaign presentation, and everyone else had gone home. He walked me to my car, and when we got there, he just looked at me for a long moment and said I was amazing. Then he kissed me, soft and careful, like he'd been thinking about it for weeks. I should have stopped it right there, but I didn't want to. For the first time in so long, someone wanted me enough to take a risk. Someone thought I was worth it. After that, things moved pretty quickly between us. We'd find excuses to grab lunch together, stay late to work on projects, text constantly throughout the day, Ian made me feel like the most fascinating person in the world. He'd ask about my opinions on everything, remember stories I told him, notice when I seemed stressed or tired. When I was with him, I felt like the best version of myself instead of this invisible, unappreciated woman I'd become at home. I started putting more effort into how I looked for work, buying new clothes and actually caring about my appearance again. Leon didn't notice. I'd come home energized and happy from spending time with Ian, and Leon would barely look up from whatever he was doing on his computer. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Here was Ian, lighting up when he saw me, making me laugh until my sides hurt, treating me like I mattered. And there was Leon, acting like I was just part of the furniture. When Ian suggested we could spend some real time together outside of work, I knew what he was really asking. Part of me knew I should say no. Should try to work on things with Leon first. But honestly, what was there to work on? Leon had made it clear through his actions that he was perfectly content with our boring, passionless routine. He never tried to plan dates or surprise me or do anything that showed he actually wanted to be married to me specifically. I was just this person who happened to live in his house and split the bills. So when Ian sent me that first photo, I sent one back. When he told me I was beautiful and that he couldn't stop thinking about me, I told him the same thing. When he said he wished we could go away somewhere together, just the two of us, I started wishing for the same thing. It felt like waking up after being asleep for years. That's when Brittany mentioned she was planning her bachelorette trip to Vegas and asked if I wanted to come. A whole weekend away from the house, from Leon's silent disapproval and complete lack of interest in my existence. A chance to actually have fun and feel alive, and maybe, if Ian happened to be in Vegas that same weekend for his own reasons, spend some real time together without having to sneak around. It sounded perfect. I knew Leon would probably have some opinion about it, because he had this way of making faces and asking pointed questions whenever I wanted to do anything social without him. Not that he ever wanted to come along or make an effort to get to know my friends. He just didn't like me having plans that didn't revolve around sitting at home watching him ignore me. But I was done asking permission to have a life. When I told Leon about the Vegas trip, I tried to keep it casual. Just mentioned that Brittany was getting married and having her bachelorette party there, and I was planning to go. His face immediately did that thing where he looked like I told him something terrible. And I could practically see him working up to some lecture about money or timing or whatever excuse he was going to use to try to control what I did. What if I don't want you to go? He asked in that quiet voice he used when he was trying to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. That's when I realized I needed to be clear about boundaries. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life asking my husband's permission every time I wanted to leave the house or see my friends. So I laid it out for him straight. So I'm going to Vegas in 3 weeks for Brittany's bachelorette trip. It's already planned and paid for. If you don't want me to go, that's fine. But you'll be sleeping on the couch for a week. I thought that would be the end of it. Usually when I put my foot down about something, Leon would grumble for a while and then drop it. He hated conflict even more than he hated the idea of me having fun without him. But instead of backing down, he just looked at me with this expression I couldn't read. You can't keep me from living my life, I continued. All my friends are going, if you try to stop me, it's just going to make things worse. I expected him to argue or try to negotiate or do something that showed he actually cared whether I went or not. Instead, he just nodded and said, cool, I'll take the couch. That was it. No fight, no discussion. No attempt to understand why this trip was important to me. Just complete indifference. It was like he couldn't be bothered to even pretend he cared what I did anymore. Fine, if that's how he wanted to play it. I wasn't going to waste energy trying to make him care. The week he spent on the couch was actually kind of liberating. I didn't have to deal with his silent judgment or pretend everything was fine between us. I could text Ian without worrying about Leon looking over my shoulder or asking questions. Ian was so excited about the possibility of us having real time together, and honestly his enthusiasm was infectious. He made me feel desired and wanted in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. Ian had business meetings in Vegas that same weekend. Pure coincidence. And we started talking about what it would be like to actually be together somewhere we didn't have to hide or sneak around. I sent him some photos of things I was planning to pack for the trip, including some lingerie I'd bought specifically with him in mind. Vegas preview, I captioned one of them. And his response made me feel more attractive than I'd felt in years. I texted Brittany about how excited I was to finally have a weekend with no rules. To just have fun and be myself without someone monitoring my every move. She knew what my situation at home was like, how suffocating it had become. And she was happy I was finally doing something for myself. Leon barely spoke to me that whole week. He'd come home from work, heat up some dinner, and disappear into his office without even asking how my day was. It was like living with a stranger who resented my existence, but was too passive-aggressive to actually say anything about it. If this was how he wanted our marriage to be, then maybe we both needed to seriously think about what we were doing. The Sunday night before I was supposed to leave for Vegas, I was taking a long shower and thinking about how good it was going to feel to get away from all the tension and silent treatment. When I came out, Leon was already in bed, pretending to be asleep like he'd been doing all week. I didn't even bother trying to talk to him. What was the point? Monday morning. Leon left for work earlier than usual without saying goodbye. I figured he was still sulking about the trip, which was pretty typical for him. When he didn't like something, he'd just withdraw even more than usual and wait for me to feel guilty enough to change my mind. But I was done playing that game. I went to work feeling lighter than I had in months. Ian brought me coffee and we talked about our Vegas plans. How nice it would be to actually spend time together without worrying about who might see us. The whole day felt full of possibility. That's why it was such a shock when the process server showed up at my office Tuesday afternoon with divorce papers. I was in the middle of a meeting when my assistant knocked and said someone needed to see me urgently. I thought maybe it was a client emergency or something work-related. Instead, this official-looking man handed me a manila envelope and said I was being served. Everyone in the meeting just stared as I opened the papers and saw Leon's name on a petition for divorce. I couldn't even process what I was looking at. Leon had never mentioned divorce, never threatened it, never even suggested he was that unhappy. We'd had the thing about Vegas, but people have disagreements about trips all the time. That's not grounds for ending a marriage. I immediately tried calling Leon, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried his work number, and his assistant said he was unavailable. I kept calling throughout the day and got nothing. It was like he'd just disappeared, leaving me to figure out what the hell was happening through legal paperwork. The humiliation of being served at work was bad enough, but the worst part was not understanding where this was coming from. Yes, we'd been having some problems lately, but what marriage doesn't go through rough patches? I thought Leon was just being dramatic about the Vegas thing, not planning to blow up our entire life together. When I finally got home that night, Leon wasn't there. His clothes were gone from the closet. His computer was gone. Even his stupid coffee mug was missing from the kitchen. He'd moved out without saying a word. Like I was some kind of dangerous person he needed to escape from, in secret. I kept trying to reach him, leaving voicemails explaining that we could work this out, that he was being ridiculous, that people don't get divorced over disagreements about bachelorette parties. But he wouldn't answer my calls or respond to my texts. It was like he decided I was dead to him overnight. That's when I started reaching out to his family, thinking maybe they could talk some sense into him. His mom had always liked me, and his sister and I got along fine. But when I called them, they were cold and distant, like they'd already heard some version of events that made me the bad guy. They wouldn't tell me where Leon was staying or help me get in touch with him. I even tried calling his boss, thinking maybe there was something going on at work that was making him act so irrationally. But his boss just said Leon had requested some personal time and wouldn't be discussing his private business with anyone. It felt like everyone had conspired to shut me out of my own life. I couldn't understand how Leon had managed to turn everyone against me so quickly, or what story he was telling people to make them think I was the problem. All I'd done was plan a trip with my friends. Since when was that a crime? When I finally got a lawyer and started trying to understand what Leon was claiming in his petition, it became clear he'd been planning this for a while. He had documentation of our finances, photographs of our house and belongings, even records of my work schedule and social activities. It was like he'd been building a case against me, without me knowing it. The worst part was his claim that I'd been unfaithful to the marriage. I mean, yes, Ian and I had gotten close, but we were friends, co-workers. Leon was acting like I'd been running some kind of elaborate affair when, really, I just found someone who actually paid attention to me and made me feel appreciated. If Leon had been a better husband, if he'd shown any interest in my happiness or tried to meet my emotional needs, none of this would have happened. I tried explaining this to him through his lawyer, how I'd been lonely and neglected and just needed someone to talk to, how it didn't mean anything serious, and I was just confused because he'd been so distant and cold. But Leon wouldn't even consider counseling or trying to work things out. He wanted to end everything as quickly as possible, like our 7 years together meant nothing to him. The divorce hearing was a nightmare. Leon showed up looking calm and prepared, with folders full of evidence and this whole presentation about why our marriage was irretrievably broken. I tried to explain my side, how isolated I'd felt, how he'd stopped putting any effort into our relationship, how I'd just been trying to find some happiness. But the judge seemed more interested in Leon's paperwork than my feelings. I couldn't help crying when they talked about dividing up our house and belongings, like we were just business partners dissolving a company. This was supposed to be our life together, our future. And Leon was treating it like a failed investment he wanted to liquidate as quickly as possible. The settlement was pretty straightforward since we didn't have kids or complicated assets. We had to sell the house and split everything 50-50. Leon didn't even want spousal support. He just wanted out. It was like he couldn't wait to erase every trace of our relationship and start over without me. After the divorce was finalized, I had to find a new place to live and figure out how to rebuild my entire life. Leon had changed his phone number and blocked me on all social media, so I had no way to reach out to him even if I wanted to. It was like he'd decided I was toxic and needed to be completely eliminated from his existence. A couple months later, I was having dinner at this gastropub downtown when I saw Leon walk in with some woman I'd never seen before. She was pretty in that generic way, blonde and smiley, laughing at whatever boring thing he was saying. It made me sick to see how quickly he'd moved on, and like our marriage had meant so little to him that he was already parading around with someone new. I couldn't just sit there and watch him pretend to be charming with this random woman when he'd barely spoken to me for months before the divorce. So I walked over to their table and said, "Really, Leon?" Already, he looked up at me with this annoyed expression, like I was some stranger bothering him instead of the woman he'd been married to for 7 years. The blonde looked confused and uncomfortable, which honestly served her right for going out with someone she obviously didn't know very well. "You know, he's a cheater." "Right," I told her, because she deserved to know what kind of person she was getting involved with. "He'll get bored with you too, and then just disappear one day without explanation." Leon stood up and said, "You should go," in that same cold voice he'd used when he told me he'd take the couch. Like I was the one being unreasonable when he was the one flaunting his new girlfriend in public. The whole restaurant was staring by then, and the woman looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I probably should have left it alone, but seeing Leon act like he was the victim in our situation when he was obviously perfectly fine and moving on with his life made me furious. Security ended up asking me to leave, which was humiliating. But at least that woman got a reality check about who she was dating. Leon always acted like he was this nice, quiet guy. But look how quickly he'd thrown away our marriage and moved on to someone new. She'd figure out eventually what kind of person he really was. A few weeks later, I decided to stop by Leon's apartment to see if we could talk like adults. I brought dinner from his favorite Thai place and sent him an email explaining that I just wanted to talk, and that I'd brought food to show I still cared about his well-being. I wasn't trying to get back together or cause drama. I just thought we should be able to have a conversation about everything that had happened. But when I got to his building, the doorman said Leon had left instructions not to let me up. Like I was some kind of dangerous stalker instead of his ex-wife who just wanted closure. It was so typical of Leon to hide behind other people instead of dealing with conflict directly. Around the same time, I heard through mutual friends that Leon had gotten some kind of promotion at work and was acting like his life was so much better without me. It bothered me that he was probably telling people I'd been the problem in our marriage, when really he'd been the one who gave up and refused to work on anything. I thought about filing a complaint with his company's ethics department, just to point out that Leon wasn't the perfect employee he pretended to be. I mean, if he could abandon his wife without warning, what did that say about his character and reliability? But I decided that would probably just make me look petty. One night when I was out with some friends, I saw Leon at the same bar with that same blonde woman. They looked pretty cozy, holding hands and whispering to each other like teenagers. It was disgusting how quickly he'd replaced me, like I was just some interchangeable piece in his boring little life. I sent him a text later that night. Nothing dramatic, just saying I'd seen him and hoped he was happy. But apparently he'd changed his number again. Because the message didn't go through, it was like he was determined to pretend I'd never existed. The next time I ran into Leon, it was at the gym we'd both been going to for years. He was there with the blonde woman, showing her how to use the equipment like he was some kind of fitness expert. It was almost funny, since Leon had never been particularly athletic or interested in working out until apparently now. I went over to say hello, just being friendly, and asked if we could talk for 5 minutes. Nothing heavy. Just a normal conversation between two people who used to know each other. But Leon acted like I was attacking him or something. "If you touch me again, I'm calling the cops," he said, even though I'd barely put my hand on his arm to get his attention. He was being completely overdramatic, making a scene in front of his new girlfriend and everyone else at the gym. The whole situation was so frustrating. Leon was acting like I was this crazy person who couldn't be trusted, when all I'd ever done was try to save our marriage and then try to have a civil relationship after he decided to end it. He was the one who'd given up on us, who'd refused to work on our problems, who'd moved on immediately with someone new. But somehow I was the villain in his story. Eventually, I had to find a new gym because Leon complained to the management about me harassing him there. It was ridiculous. We lived in the same city. We were going to run into each other sometimes. That's just how life works. But Leon wanted to control every aspect of his environment, so he never had to deal with any reminders of the mess he'd made. I heard from mutual friends that Leon had changed jobs and moved to a different apartment across town. Apparently, he was telling people he needed a fresh start. Like our entire relationship had been some kind of trauma he needed to recover from. It was insulting and hurtful, but also kind of pathetic that he felt like he had to completely rebuild his life just to avoid occasionally seeing me. The blonde woman disappeared after a few months, which wasn't surprising. Leon wasn't exactly the most exciting or attentive partner, as I knew from experience, but apparently he'd learned something from our divorce, because I heard he was being a lot more social and outgoing with whoever he dated next. It's been over a year now since everything fell apart. And Leon seems to have completely moved on with his life. New job, new apartment, new girlfriend, who he's apparently keeping very private this time. Smart move, I guess, since his last relationship didn't work out so well when his ex-wife was around to provide some context. I've moved on too. Obviously, I'm still working at the tech firm. Still friends with Brittany and the rest of that group. Ian and I didn't work out long term, which was probably for the best since office relationships can get complicated. But I learned a lot about what I actually need in a relationship, what I'm not willing to settle for anymore. Sometimes I wonder if Leon ever thinks about our marriage differently now, whether he realizes that maybe he could have tried harder or been more understanding about what I was going through, but knowing Leon, he's probably convinced himself that everything that happened was entirely my fault and he was just an innocent victim. People always want to make these situations black and white. Like someone has to be the good guy and someone has to be the bad guy. But real life is more complicated than that. Yes, I made some mistakes and handled things poorly sometimes. But Leon wasn't exactly husband of the year either. He was distant and neglectful and completely unwilling to work on our problems when I tried to bring them up. I think we were just wrong for each other. Ultimately, I needed someone who would pay attention to me and make me feel valued. And Leon needed someone who would be content to just exist quietly in the background of his life. Neither of us was getting what we needed. But instead of figuring out how to fix it, Leon just decided to throw everything away and start over. Maybe that worked out better for him in the long run. Maybe his new girlfriend is perfectly happy being ignored half the time and never asking for anything more than basic coexistence. Some people are satisfied with that kind of relationship. I'm just not one of them. I don't regret standing up for myself or refusing to settle for a marriage that made me miserable. I regret that Leon couldn't be more flexible or understanding, that he had to make everything so dramatic and final. But I can't control how other people react to situations. I can only control my own choices and try to learn from what happened. These days I'm focused on building the kind of life I actually want, instead of just accepting whatever someone else thinks I should be satisfied with. It's been a difficult process, rebuilding everything from scratch. But at least now I know what I'm not willing to compromise on anymore. Leon seems happy with his new life, and honestly I hope he is. We weren't right for each other. But that doesn't mean he's a bad person or that I wish him harm. I just wish he could have handled our divorce with a little more maturity and dignity instead of treating me like some kind of dangerous person who needed to be avoided at all costs. But people deal with difficult situations in their own ways. And maybe cutting off all contact was what Leon needed to do to move forward. I can't say I understand it or that it didn't hurt. But I've accepted that's just how he chose to handle things. I'm in a better place now than I was during those last months of our marriage, when I felt invisible and unappreciated and desperate for any kind of connection. I know what I want in a partner now, and I'm not willing to settle for less just because it's easier or more convenient. Maybe someday Leon and I will be able to have a normal conversation about what happened, acknowledge that we both made mistakes, and wish each other well. But if not, that's okay too. Sometimes people just need to go their separate ways and build new lives without looking back.